Pilgrimage to Mecca. The town was full of jostling pilgrims, old and young, male and female, white, yellow, and black. They thronged the old and new parts of the town, seeking provisions for the journey to Mecca, arranging transport to the holy city, waiting for friends whom they had agreed to meet in Mecca perhaps a year and several thousand miles away. Though quite a number of pilgrims march southwards to Mecca by the austere route through the Nejd desert, by far the majority enter Saudi Arabia through Jeddah, either by sea or by way of the new and most impressive aerodrome. The transformation which these people all undergo as soon as they reach the holy country has to be seen to be believed. There is a saying that the pilgrimage makes a good man better, but that it may make a bad man better or worse. Whatever the truth of this may be, there is no doubt at all that a high emotion, akin to nothing which one has felt before, grips even the most westernized of Muslims when they set foot even on the secular soil or sand of Jeddah. Apart from the regular flights of Saudi Arabian Airways and other scheduled arrivals, Jeddah Airport receives an endless succession of chartered aircraft from India, Pakistan, and other Arab lands, even far off Indonesia. The actual atmosphere of the city differs little from that of many other towns of some importance in the Middle East. The same fierce sun is here, beating down upon a mixture of modern steel and concrete office buildings, interspersed with those of the Turkish and Red Sea Arab type. Open-fronted cafes, money changers, sellers of sweetmeats and cool drinks, they are all here. There is a smaller non-Muslim population than in most Arab cities, however. One part of the city contains the magnificent foreign embassies and consulates. It is among the pilgrims themselves that the strange, otherworldly feeling exists. After the first excitement of arriving at long last on Saudi soil had passed, I made the formal vow, the niyyah, which every pilgrim resolves, and felt myself in some unique way cut off from the rest of humanity. Things like the smoking habit, like worrying about what might happen from one hour to the next, or even my future plans, all seemed to dim into a petty and more than welcome insignificance. I stopped writing my diary, found myself almost impelled by a sense of community with tens of thousands of white-robed fellows to read and recite passages from the Islamic scriptures. One felt the need for communion with a mightier, a vaster force than mankind. Although it had been said time and again that the human mind needs some sort of intermediary, whether it be a man or a stick or stone, an idol or picture, to concentrate upon, let alone comprehend divinity, we pilgrims to Mecca felt no such need. We were not there to worship the Kaaba or the Black Stone. We worshipped no man, nor did we accord divine rights or a divine character to anything save one power which we could not visualize, and did not want or expect to be able to see. Yet in us all was a feeling of contentment and an underlying excitement that we were about to achieve something that we had all worked for, to arrive somewhere which was dear to our hearts. We were on the verge of fulfillment. That was what we expected, and that was the nature of the sensation which we all experienced when we actually reached Mecca the Holy. I sought out as many of my fellow pilgrims as I could, of diverse origins, both social and otherwise. It would be difficult to name an ethnic group, a social class, or almost any other type which was not represented. Apart from the very large numbers from India, Pakistan, and Indonesia, whence come the majority of foreign pilgrims, I collected Kurds, Bosnians, Hadendoas, Tajiks, and a Japanese. Some had been Jews, others were former Christians. There was an ex-communist who had struck up a great friendship with an extremely wealthy Indian businessman from Kenya. In our sandals and new white robes, we explored the fascinating byways of the older part of the city, discussing theology and Islamic history, and exchanging stories from our lives. During these discussions, while we were waiting for our transport arrangements to Mecca, I was able to observe in some detail the change which must have come over these people since they arrived a matter of hours or days ago from the farthest corners of the world. From what they said about their lives, I could tell that some of them, not so long ago, had been of that glib-tongued, thoroughly tiresome group of Middle Eastern intellectuals who know a little about a lot of things and have to pour it all out as soon as they are able to get it into words, which does not take long. Now, dedicated to perform the visit to Mecca and the stoning of the former idols to the north, they spoke and acted with a reasonableness which I am very sure would have surprised even their own families. There were at least 3 wealthy businessmen, one from Mombasa, another with textile interests in Bombay, the third a ship owner from Dakar. Different in race and tongue, they carried on their conversations in English. I am quite convinced that in any commercial contact with these men, their razor-sharp minds would have driven a bargain which no normal person could hope to match. They had that prosperous, horn-rimmed, well-cared-for look, which is the stamp of the tycoon anywhere. 2 of them had arrived in their own aeroplanes. Yet here in the mellow Jeddah night, as we sat by the edge of the curving inland bay, their thoughts and reactions were no different from those of the gentle, untutored servants whom they had brought with them, and whose tasks they shared. This transformation alone is, to my mind, one of the wonders of the pilgrimage. Although I must admit that I was not in a very critical frame of mind, I was immensely impressed by their directness and calm. I never for a moment sensed any suggestion of hypocrisy, any reversion to those mundane matters which must have claimed their daily attention for upwards of 20 years. Almost as fast as they descended upon Jeddah, the pilgrims were making for Mecca, eastwards to the holy city. Like a foaming, surging tidal wave, the sea of humanity moved on and on. Barefoot and carrying packs, mounted on mules and donkeys, perched beneath awnings rigged up on camels, the poorer and more old-fashioned faithful marched. Motor lorries and buses, each one packed to overflowing with pilgrims and yet more pilgrims. Glittering new American cars monopolized the middle of the road, and threw the black macadamized ribbon into moving, coloured relief. From the devout concourse of dedicated humanity came a roar which seemed to cleave the shimmering heat haze with almost physical force. Labbaik, Allahumma, labbaik. Here we are, O Lord, in thy presence. As my car swept past the gold and green princely palaces radiating out from Jeddah's centre, the emotion of the sound and movement of that almost unbelievable multitude gripped me with increasing force. Load after load of white-robed devotees with shaven heads roared past. There were several hundred soldiers, chanting in rhythmic unison, their incisive voices momentarily gaining power over the uncoordinated litany of the pedestrians. Labbaik, Allahumma, labbaik. Labbaik, la sharika lak, labbaik. Inna alhamda wa aniyamata laka wal mulk, la sharika lak. I felt the blood rising in my head as the accented words seized my consciousness as it were in a hypnotic grip. Here we are, O Lord, in thy presence. We are here, none like unto thee. Verily all praise, all power to thee. Thou hast no partner. The absolute indivisibility and possession of all power are, according to Islam, supreme attributes unique to Allah. As the trucks swept past, I noticed upon their sides the sword and date tree, emblem of Saudi Arabia. Under this is the motto, in cursive Arabic letters, "No God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah." In sluggish contrast to the intense movement along the motorway, comes the unending white flow of pedestrian worshippers, men and women, children and nurses, guides and servants. Why do they walk? Many are poor. Most, however, march this final 50 miles Meccawards either to fulfill a vow, or because they feel that greater humility and piety attach to entering the holy city afoot, as Muhammad did nearly 1400 years ago. Although a conqueror, he walked thus with the 4 companions to Abraham's shrine, there to demolish the 300 and more idols, and to establish the worship of one God alone among the people of this land. Stretching far away to each horizon beyond the road for most of this bleak and punishing journey, nothing may be sighted beyond rippling dunes of the finest brownish sand. Here and there a Bedouin woman brings her camel to a well. Featureless is the only word to describe the plain across which we were moving. Nothing stood out from the desert to remind us of the centuries since Arabia produced a man who was to become the inspirer of hundreds of millions. We might have been projected back into the very days of the mission. As my faculties seemed suddenly to sharpen, I became aware of the astonishing variety in physiognomy among the surging throng. Uniform in their unstitched ahram sheet, the men with one shoulder bare, there seemed to be almost no 2 people who resembled one another. Blonde, blue-eyed, chunky Syrians and Anatolian peasant types marched along Parthan hillmen with hooked noses and long curly black hair. Sudanese tribesmen, with finely chiselled features and cheek marks denoting their origin, strode beside podgy, round-faced Indians, obviously far more used to sedentary activities. A Javanese under 5 feet tall was dwarfed by a thin, rangy woman with copper-coloured hair who was telling a 99-bead rosary of pale amber. All indications of rank or distinction, manifestation of arrogance or self-seeking, every trace of petty individuality had vanished. This was a collection of people such as even Hollywood could not surely hope to muster. Devoutly anxious as they undoubtedly were to reach Mecca, they were neither a rabble, nor a mere chance collection of travelling companions. This much was evident from their behaviour. If one faltered, his fellows would stop and give him a helping hand. There was no wild panic when a truck overturned and strewed its 100 occupants over the patiently plodding foot passengers. Those who immediately surrounded the vehicle stopped and picked up the bruised ones. Nobody seemed seriously hurt. Those who came behind merely made a short detour, without crowding around to see the sight. The calm would, under any other circumstances or anywhere else, have seemed unnatural. Here I did not give it more than a passing thought. This road is one of absolutely first-class quality, and is kept clear of sand by the incessant motor traffic, for there are no railways in southern Saudi Arabia, though the old line from the north, which was wrecked by T.E. Lawrence's Arabs, is now being surveyed with a view to putting it into commission again. On we went, past the interminable column of humanity, as the road climbed sharply into the iron-stained foothills beyond which the holy city lies. This precipitous part was literally hewn from the rocks by bulldozers, which are still working on the road in some places. Through these narrow, twisting, man-made defiles climbs the car, while something like a brief gust of delicious wind seems to move slowly past us. Suddenly, around a bend, looms a sign inscribed in Arabic and English. Stop. Restricted area. Muslims only permitted beyond this point. Saudi guards, some carrying the cane switches characteristic of Nejd, others hugging automatic weapons, come forward to inspect our credentials. Small, wiry men, their martial bearing is well set off by the khaki uniform and green Arab headdress. Arranging transport, guides, and 101 other facilities for up to 1 million pilgrims is a Herculean task, which the pilgrimage administration carries out without any hitch whatever. Matters of identity, documentation, and quarantine are so well attended to that I felt enormous relief that I was not trying to get past this and other posts under false pretenses. It has been said that non-Muslims have penetrated into Mecca undetected. Before believing it, I should have to interview such a person personally. It is not difficult to get fairly full details about the pilgrimage, and then to write it as one's own experience. But I doubt whether anyone other than a Muslim has actually performed the pilgrimage since Burton. While I say it is just possible that an impostor may have done it, I am quite sure that the difficulties today are immensely greater than they were during the time of Turkish suzerainty. Saudi Arabia has all the modern methods of detection and control at her disposal, and she uses them. This is not to say that a surprisingly large number have not tried, as one police official told me. After this point, 14 miles from the city, the ruins of abandoned Turkish forts seem to brood in the baking desert silence. These strong points were raised by the Ottomans in an attempt to combat the brigand menace, but it took Ibn Saud's rough and ready justice to stamp out banditry in the Hejaz. Until the Napoleon of Arabia took over control, robber bands used to swoop down on pilgrim caravans, looting and killing. The performing of the Hajj used to be considered such a dangerous undertaking that pilgrims, before setting out for Arabia, made their wills and said a final goodbye to their families. As, however, pilgrimage is one of the 5 essential pillars of Islam, its performance is obligatory on all believers. The other 4 pillars are prayer, fasting during the daytime in the month of Ramadan, testimony to the unity of God and the prophethood of Muhammad, and the giving of alms. Inside the forbidden zone, where no life, even of an animal, may be taken, we halted to say Thanksgiving prayers. Near the spot where yet another of the Turkish forts crumbles into unregretted ruin, the king had erected a shelter and well for the dusty faithful. This one was built by the hands of Ibn Saud himself, while others are now placed at regular intervals along the road. We passed on. It could not be far now. There was a tenseness visible in every face as we passed group after group of trudging figures, telling their rosaries or reciting passages from the Quran, which many know by heart in its entirety. Suddenly, as we sped through the multicoloured yet austere-looking igneous rocks, the dazzlingly white panorama of Mecca swept into view, spread out below, surrounded by its 7 hills. The car lost speed as from the driver's lips came yet again that glad, involuntary exclamation echoed by every pilgrim, "We are here, O Lord." So this was Mecca. Built in a hollow, surrounded by frowning crags, the many-storied houses have from a distance a strangely modern look. Yet the entire impression of the white stone city against the furrowed darkness of the crags, when seen at any rate by a pilgrim, has something of an intoxicating quality. I distinctly remember looking at the houses, the wide streets, the carved wooden shutters, and thinking, here I am. No matter what happens, I have seen Mecca. I have reached Mecca. This is Mecca, the holy. Had I been on foot, I am sure that I would have run forward, thrown myself on the sand, made some sort of demonstration of joy. The driver had stopped the car and was reciting the first chapter of the Quran, the opening. I looked back to see the effect that Mecca was having on the other pilgrims when they first glimpsed it. It may have been because of weariness, or it may have been some other reason, but the inevitable reaction to the sight of Mecca was that a pilgrim stopped dead, stood stock still. At first there was a look almost of unbelief on every face. Then in rising crescendo came the cry, There is no God but Allah. Muhammad is the Prophet of Allah. It echoed and re-echoed through the gathering darkness. Not a chant, not a song, both are forbidden by Islam's austere interdiction against show in religion. It was more like a cry of wonder, of hope, of fulfillment. La ilaha illa Allah, Muhammad Rasul Allah. This is the Tawhid, the confession of faith, the first pillar of Islam. This is the phrase which should be the first sound heard by every newborn Muslim babe, the sentence which identifies one Muslim to another, the contract, whose repetition establishes the moment of conversion of a person to the faith. It is part of the call to prayer throughout the world of Islam, and a part of every private or congregational prayer. It is the motto of the House of Saud, the war cry of the Rif, the Turks, the Arabs, the Afghans. It is also one of the phrases which is used on almost every occasion, from a wedding to a birth to death. Every Muslim is supposed to die with no other words on his lips. The orderly mass of humanity was flooding past our stationary car now, and the driver let in the clutch, and we were off on the very last lap of a journey which had begun for all of us, in a religious sense, on the day upon which we were born. Abundant water, drilled with the aid of modern apparatus, has made a considerable difference to the appearance of the city. 2 decades before, there had been only one solitary piece of vegetation in Mecca. This was the tree, and people were once taken to see this wonder. Today there are gardens and palm groves everywhere. Water is usually taken for granted by Westerners and by those of us who come from greener lands. Think what a priceless boon it is in the arid East. No wonder that, realizing its value, the desert Arab may throw a few drops of the precious fluid on the sand before he slakes his thirst, murmuring, "Let the ground drink. It is more important than I." It is still only one Muslim in 1,000 who can manage to reach Mecca in any one year, and less than 1 in 10, on an average, who can get there during his lifetime, even though the pilgrimage and the visit to the house of Allah is an obligation binding upon all. After a final check of our bona fides, we were allowed to enter the sacred city. Everywhere there were signs of modern progress. Buildings seemed almost to be the principal industry. The available space is becoming so limited that new villas are now being constructed higher and higher up the surrounding cliffs, which in some places actually jut into the streets in the form of rugged outcrops. Right in the heart of the city stands the central shrine of Islam, the great mosque, and the sanctuary of the Kaaba. Surrounded by massive walls, the place is guarded by fierce, vigilant Wahhabi warriors. A vast arena is flanked by towering minarets from which the call to prayer is made, nowadays relayed to every corner of the sacred enclosure by amplifiers. No fewer than 19 arched gateways, richly embellished with coloured geometrical designs, pierce the walls of the Haram, the sanctuary. All around the many hundreds of yards of encircling rampart run quotations from the Quran, executed in flawless calligraphy. Photography, or the making of pictures of any kind, is absolutely forbidden by Wahhabi law in this hallowed area. Once inside, through one of those gates, the worshipper removes his shoes and walks clad only in his single cotton sheet towards the towering black-draped Kaaba, the cube which stands in the centre of the sanctuary. The sanctified area itself is a vast, unroofed rectangle, surrounded on its inner sides by arched colonnades, resembling cloisters. Wide paths of white marble radiate from the Kaaba to the various gates. Although there is no priesthood in Islam, the enormous number of foreign pilgrims who visit here without a knowledge of the customary prayers and duties have necessitated the institution of secular guides, known as mutawifin. This means those who enable one to turn. Many of these are voluntary workers, and all of them are accomplished linguists. There are said to be 1,000 such guides who conduct the pilgrims in national parties through the ceremonies. Many are well-to-do merchants of a pious bent of mind. I arrived in Mecca at night and would have to wait until morning to see the Afghan mutawif, who was to be my guide. Before starting the actual pilgrimage rite at the Kaaba, however, I decided to visit the Kaaba sanctuary. I walked through the brilliantly lighted covered market, which runs along one outside wall of the Kaaba enclosure, to the gate where the booksellers' shops are located. As I approached the gateway, the rising murmur of thousands of voices repeating their prayers faded from my consciousness, as I glimpsed, away beyond a line of mighty pillars, the black draped granite cube, thrown into brilliant relief against its marble surround. Electric lighting has replaced the ancient oil lamps of the Haram. Even in its harsh brilliance, the immense rectangle retained that magical quality of mystery and otherworldly fascination which has been so often described by pilgrims. I paused, wonderstruck, my senses almost reeling, certainly deeply affected. A group of newly arrived pilgrims, led by their mutawif, passed me and made their way slowly along the marble pathway towards the cube. Soon they were merged with the endlessly circumambulating figures already making their anti-clockwise circuit of the holiest place of Islam. I walked towards this Qibla, the point towards which every Muslim daily turns 5 times in his prayers. As I was not yet sufficiently coached in the observances to join the actual ceremonies, I took up a reverent position some 10 yards from the cube, to say the customary 2 prayers of thanksgiving. Such is the breathtaking extent of the sanctuary that this, the goal of every pilgrim heart, seemed the least crowded place in holy Mecca. Away over to the right, some 200 African pilgrims were making their obeisances towards the Kaaba, yet they seemed to occupy an infinitesimal part of the arena. Near the Kaaba stands the place of Abraham, where the patriarch is reputed to have stood to say his prayers. Formerly the 4 traditionist schools of Islam each had its own praying place, behind which the Hanafi, Hanbali, Maliki or Shafi'i followers, as the case might be, ranged themselves. Since the puritanical Wahhabis took over Mecca, these distinctions have been abolished, though the erections, rather like small archways, still stand. A few yards farther on is the Zamzam, the holy well which is believed to have originated with the spring which miraculously appeared to quench the thirst of Hagar and her child in the wilderness. Genesis 21 verse 19. All pilgrims drink this water. Some steep a corner of their ihram robe in it, for eventual use as a shroud. Day and night these places, like the gates, are patrolled by Saudi guards with canes, alert for any infraction of customary decorum. There was no sign of the teeming pigeons which crowd the sanctuary during daytime. One odd thing about them is that they never defile the Kaaba's covering, even though a movement among the pilgrims often causes them to wheel overhead. Neither, I was later to observe time and again, do they alight on the cube itself, though the pathways, sand, well shelter and awnings are all covered from time to time with perching and strutting birds. These peculiarities have been noted for centuries. I was as unable as my predecessor here to find a cause for this unusual behaviour of the birds. As soon as one party of pilgrims moved away from the Kaaba, another took its place. Day and night throughout the years, the faithful are always traversing this circuit, trudging round and round the Kaaba, making special supplications, intoning the appropriate prayers, kissing the black stone which is set in the lower southeast corner. Many, if not all, of the residents of the city come here at some time during each day to perform this tawaf ceremony. Embedded in a silver setting in the Kaaba's actual granite matrix is the famous black stone. Its history is interesting, but generally much misunderstood by others than Muslims. Even today, learned Western Orientalists confuse the Kaaba with the stone. The stone is kissed by every worshipper after the seventh circuit of the cube. Each time he passes it, the pilgrim raises his hands, palms outwards towards it. This attention is paid to the stone not as an act of faith or worship, but merely because it is the only surviving relic which was touched by the Prophet Muhammad, and because it was reputedly cast down from heaven as a sign for Adam. It is said to be of meteoric origin, but I am completely convinced otherwise. In the first place, it is not black, as I was able to see later in the daylight, but rather more of the colour and appearance of dark amber. I tapped the surface, which is distinctly not stone nor metallic. I would say that it is composed of an entirely unfamiliar substance which I would recognise again, but which I cannot describe by analogy. It seems to have perceptible characteristics which defy definition, but which make a characteristic impression on the eye and hands. One would recognise this substance if it were ever again encountered. The heavily embroidered kiswa, covering of the Kaaba, is slit at the black stone corner to give access to the spot. The silver setting itself is extremely unusual in workmanship, and is shaped like an inverted bowl with a large circular hole into which one has to put one's head to kiss the stone. In the centre is a hollow several inches deep, worn into the stone by the kisses of millions of pilgrims. There is a story dating back to the time of Muhammad, which is supposed to record one of his first indications of wisdom. When he was a small boy, there was a dispute among the four most important clans of Mecca as to which should have the honour of nominating a chief to replace the stone in the place from which it had been removed during repairs to the Kaaba. Tempers ran high, and eventually, in accordance with the then invariable custom of consulting omens, it was agreed that the first person to pass into the sanctuary from outside would be allowed to judge. As it happened, it was the young Muhammad. When the dispute was referred to him, it was expected that he would favour the candidate of his own tribe, the Quraysh. Instead, he advised that one chief from each tribe should take a corner of a heavy cloth in which the stone was to be laid, so that they could share the task equally. Muhammad himself lifted the stone into the cloth to prevent any complications as to the right of performing this task. This story is one of those which show that the importance of the stone goes back before Muhammad's time. But the stone could not have been one of the 300 idols which Muhammad later destroyed, as he would not have been allowed to permit one to survive. He himself banned anything which smacked of idolatry, and his contemporaries in the early days of Islam, when idol breaking was in vogue, are on record as being of the type that would have bitterly contested any weakening from uncompromising and literal iconoclasm. The pilgrimage to Mecca was an established part of Arab religious duty long before Muhammad. The etymology of the city's name is traceable to an ancient word for holy, and it seems probable that this place was indeed intimately connected with fundamental happenings in Semitic religion in times of which we have no recorded history in the modern sense. Muhammad did not claim to be the founder of a new religion. According to Muslim belief, he merely restored the severe monotheism which was revealed to mankind through a series of prophets, of whom Jesus was one of the most important. This explains, to Muslims, why certain observances from the pre-Islamic times were retained, and the same explanation is implied in the Quran. Unsympathetic or hostile students of the religion, on the other hand, claim that Islam was developed from Judaism and Christianity, with a certain amount of purely Arabian religion retained. Needless to say, neither contention is capable of proof, though you would not think so if you read most generalized accounts of Islam by outsiders. The actual rites of the pilgrimage are thus. There is the visit to the Kaaba and its circumambulation. Then comes a sevenfold circuit barefooted between the 2 points known as Safa and Marwa, said to be the tombs of Hagar and Ishmael. On a certain day, the entire pilgrimage sets out for a place called Mina, a few miles from Mecca, there to cast stones at 3 pillars which represent devils. Prayers are said on Mount Arafat, and an animal is sacrificed in commemoration of Abraham's offering. The pilgrim's head is then shaved, and there is a 3-day festival of dedication to a new and purer life. Anyone who completes these observances is entitled to the style of Haji, and generally finds that he is revered in his native community. In some countries, those who have made the pilgrimage wear a green turban, or other indication of this distinction. Back through the crowded streets I went to my hotel, the hotel of ease and comfort, where apartments had been prepared for official guests. Built in what seemed closest to the Moorish style, its equipment and atmosphere were altogether delightful. Servants and employers ate enormous helpings of rice and meat at the same table. In fact, the dining room had the aspect of a continuous and entirely democratic feast the whole time I was there. My room overlooked a lush palm garden, beyond which I could see the stately height of the Minister of National Economy's residence. I spent a few minutes in meditation on the wide, trellised veranda. In the morning, the Mutawif of the Afghans called early. He was to take me and several others through the Kaaba and Safa Marwa ceremonies. Tall, grey-bearded, robed in white with a turban tied Afghan style, he was received with great respect by the manager and other functionaries, down to the coffee boy. Wearing one unstitched cotton piece around the lower part of our bodies, with a second similar sheet, the size of a large bath towel, over one shoulder, we walked towards the sanctuary once again, repeating after the Mutawif the vow that we had made to complete the pilgrimage, and the various other prayers. I wore, like the others, a pair of sandals with the heel and instep bare. The outfit is designed to indicate decorum and humility. No other garment, no jewellery may be worn. In pre-Islamic times, the pilgrim Arabs made the Kaaba circuit stark naked. We entered the sanctuary through the gate of Ali, son-in-law and a successor of Muhammad, and walked across the sun-baked arena towards the black stone corner of the Kaaba, where the tawaf, circumambulation, commences. One by one we stooped to kiss the black stone. Then, following the guide, we started the anti-clockwise circuit of the cube. The first 3 circuits of the Kaaba are made at a run, followed by 4 at a walking pace. The explanation for this is that Muhammad and his small band of followers, although in a state of exhaustion, ran round the Kaaba before they were eventually allowed to perform their devotions there by the hostile Quraysh. In this way, they tried to show their determination and stamina. Each time we passed the black stone, we kissed it. When the press was too great to kiss or touch the stone, the pilgrims raised their hands, palms outwards towards it, in a gesture similar to that used when warming the hands at a fire. Subjective or otherwise, there is a sensation of tingling experienced in the hands at these moments. Although there were a fair number of women among the pilgrim parties, men were in the majority. The women pilgrims' dress differs from that of the men, being composed of a long white dress which covers the body and arms, but with the face bare. Women are not allowed to wear veils in the sanctuary. The veiling of women, which was to become a Muslim custom in most Islamic countries, was in fact copied from the Christian communities in Syria by the Muslims during their conquest of that country. It was, however, known in Arabia as practiced by some of the highest class of women, and hence carried with it a suggestion of arrogance, which is therefore forbidden during the pilgrimage. In actual practice today, while the town women are veiled, those of the desert are not. White stockings and gloves complete the female pilgrim's costume. The hair must be covered. It is interesting to note in passing, since unveiling is such an issue with feminist movements in the modern East, that there is no clear injunction in the Quran or traditions of Muhammad to the effect that women should be veiled. The Quranic passage cited in defense of seclusion in reality commands that decorum and modesty be observed by believing women. Finally kissing the stone, we moved to the praying place of Abraham to say another thanksgiving prayer. It is at this point that every worshipper makes his personal supplication, asking Allah for that which is closest to his heart. Abraham is said to have stood on this spot when he was rebuilding the Kaaba, which legend holds was erected by Adam himself on the model of the Kaaba in paradise. Then water from the holy Zamzam well was brought by small boys chosen for this honour from among the noblest families. As I swallowed the liquid from the chased metal cup, I noticed that it had a slightly tart taste, but was certainly not brackish or bitter, as it had been variously described. After this part of the ceremonies, pilgrims must wait until the 8th of the month of Dhul Hijjah until they can start out on the trek to Mina and Arafat. The rituals in the holy city itself are completed by the run between the two small hills of Safa and Marwa, which course follows one outside wall of the Haram. We therefore then left the Haram and went to the starting point of the course. After repeating the testimony to the unity of God, the Tawhid, intoned by our Mutawif, we joined the throng of pilgrims running between the 2 points. On one side lay the mighty wall of the Haram, and on the other were shops mainly devoted to the sale of such items as the unique black and white rosaries, which are much prized as relics of the Hajj. You pay what you can. If you have no money, the merchant will give you one free. This say ceremony being over, the pilgrims return to their lodgings or to the sanctuary to await the 8th of Dhul Hijjah and the expedition to Mina and Arafat. The night before the march to Arafat, the sanctuary's rectangular space presents the most impressive sight that one could ever see. Here the pilgrims, in their hundreds and thousands, assemble for a final prayer. Seen from one of the many high houses which overlook the Kaaba arena, rank upon rank of worshippers, bending and standing erect again, bowing from every side towards the Kaaba, present an exhibition of concentrated worship which is undoubtedly unparalleled elsewhere. The same impression is again conveyed by the farewell visit, which takes place after the return from Arafat and the sacrifice. During this latter ceremony, the atmosphere is charged with an electric emotion. Within a short time, perhaps a few hours, certainly not more than a day or two, the pilgrim will be on his way back to mundane affairs, back to reality, back to a life whose very existence seems to have little reality here. There is a sadness and at the same time an exultation. Both of these sensations tug at the heartstrings for long, long afterwards, perhaps for life. Certainly I feel them still. The expedition to Arafat is the most complicated and ritualistic part of the pilgrimage. The faithful start leaving the city for the 5-mile walk to Mina at dawn on the 8th of the holy month. This exodus is even more impressive than the entry into Mecca, for this time every single pilgrim is present at the same time. Their swarming numbers resemble nothing that I have ever seen or heard of before. Almost every human being from Mecca itself is there as well. Shops are shut. Streets are deserted. It seems as if the very human race itself in its entirety is on the move. The night of the 8th to 9th of the month is spent camping out. Visualize 1 million people in the desert under canvas at one place. Can you? It is a sight which swamps the senses, so that they seem able to perceive only the small, individual happenings against the sheer immensity of what is going on. The following day, the entire concourse moves off, another 10 miles along the road, to Mount Arafat, and camps in the plain around the mountain. Somewhere among them, garbed in his pilgrim white, unguarded and very often unrecognized, is the King of Saudi Arabia, protector of the holy places. Prayers are said on the mountaintop, following the precedent established by the Prophet on his farewell pilgrimage, made after a premonition just before his death. Then 3 stone pillars, the devils, are stoned, in emulation of Abraham's putting the devil to flight when he tried to tempt him here, as the tradition has it. The 10th of the month is the day of sacrifice, when every pilgrim must give an animal, in commemoration of Abraham offering his son as a sacrifice to God. This is the start of the feast of Eid al-Adha, the festival of sacrifice, which is celebrated at the same time in every other Muslim country. The devils are stoned twice, and before the sacrifice the pilgrims return to Mecca to say a prayer in the Kaaba once more, and follow the Safa and Marwa pilgrim way. Finally, a piece of hair is cut or shaved from the right side of the head. Then the entire head is shaved. As I sat in the shaded courtyard, meditating upon these events, only the minarets of the mosque could be seen above the towering Kaaba, with its gold-embroidered black mantle. This is the heavy damask kiswa, which is embroidered with quotations from the Quran, and is an annual gift from Egypt. Each year the old covering is cut up, and the pieces distributed among the more fortunate pilgrims as highly prized relics. Water from the holy well, too, is supplied in rounded tins and carried to the ends of the earth, sometimes to be sprinkled upon the pilgrim's grave. Through the heat haze, I got a glimpse of the surrounding hills. All around me rested pilgrims from 100 countries, some telling their beads, others offering prayers. The tough-looking Wahhabi Bedouin guards strode alertly up and down, on the watch for any impropriety. From the Haram's administration building, with immense glass windows commanding the quadrangle, officials maintained a ceaseless vigil. I observed that the entire area of the sanctuary was regularly swept by the field glasses of those functionaries. Thousands of pigeons wheeled overhead. Some traditions say that Gabriel sometimes came in the form of a pigeon and whispered the Quran as it was being revealed in Muhammad's ear. At one time, pilgrims were frequently overcome by the terrific heat in this enclosed courtyard, for it sometimes reaches 133 degrees Fahrenheit in the shade. Recently, however, up-to-date innovations have vastly improved conditions here. Electric fans have been installed in the colonnades, Huge retractable blinds shield part of the periphery from the truly burning sun. Electricity lights the sanctuary and provides power for the Zamzam's pumps, and maintenance work goes on endlessly throughout the enormous area. When I spoke to the local people about the many improvements which the king had made towards the comfort of Mecca, they often said, "Allah has rewarded him for it. Was he not given bottomless wells of oil,